Well, we're in Psalm 14, and it's the psalm that we're going to encounter again at Psalm 53, in a very slightly different form. But Psalm 14, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So this is an analysis of atheism, and it's always good to remember that what modern people call atheism is not really what the Bible means by atheism. In the Bible, atheism is the state of all humanity, naturally speaking. They are, according to Ephesians, without God. That's what we are. We're born into a world and we are atheists, without God. And it means that we might intellectually own that and call ourselves atheists and go, no, I don't even believe there's a God for the following reasons. I think this, I think that. So therefore, I own the fact of being an atheist. But I think in fact, probably the vast majority of people don't own it, but follow false gods, even though they are without, the living God. And so that's important to bear in mind, that atheism is not a choice in the Bible. It's a simple fact to be without God. The fact that the living God does actually exist, and the divine emperor rules over the heavens and the earth and all that isn't what the Bible obviously knows that, but atheism, this idea or the living as if, practically living as if there is no God, and then sometimes speaking like it and possibly thinking like it. But we'll see in this psalm, it's primarily about living as if there's no God. That's what the atheist does, and says, look, in his heart, deep down, regardless of what he says out loud he might be religious. The fool. And it's a contrast. When it says the fool, the Bible always has a contrast between wisdom and folly. Wisdom is not just like, common sense or things like that. Wisdom in the Bible is very much to do with Jesus as the Spirit-filled Son of the Father. And wisdom, sometimes we might say, well, wisdom's really like living by the Spirit. So wisdom, strictly speaking, doesn't exist like just generally. It's life, it's church life, the wise life. That's how people live who are taking refuge in Jesus. That's what wisdom is, to fear the Lord. That's the beginning of wisdom, to fear the Lord. So wisdom begins with saying there is a God, there is this living God, and to fear him. And then from that, to take refuge in him. And then that's, church life is living out of that context of fearing the Lord and taking refuge in him. Folly is everything else. And it particularly is manifested in not fearing the Lord and not having concern for the future. It's about grasping after pleasure and treasure in this current passing life. That's folly. So the fool, because the fool lives that way, they are effectively saying in their heart, I don't think there's any God at all. Certainly no God that's paying attention, no God that I need to worry about. And the reason for that, as we go on, this is Jesus, of course, seeing this around him. And we've noticed time and time again, back in Psalm 10 verse 4, when he's distressed about the way people are around him, he's stunned that there is, Psalm 10 verse 4, no room for God in the thoughts and actions of the people around him. They are, in Psalm 10 verse 4, he's noticed already, Jesus says, he sees atheism rife around him. So here, it's Jesus analysing this and praying about it and understanding why is the world so godless? What's that about? And his analysis is, verse 1, it's because they are corrupt, their deeds are vile, there is no one who does good. So notice especially that Jesus does not engage with what we would call intellectual atheism, like as if atheism is driven by philosophical arguments to do with, I don't know, problem of evil or the success of evolution or whatever is the current thing that is, the intellectual form of atheism. There's no engagement with that anywhere in the Bible at all. It's as if that isn't serious, that of course there's no intellectual reasons to be atheist. So it's not engaged with in that way. It's rather to go, why would a foolish person believe deep down in their heart that there is no God or God isn't of relevance to them? And it's because of their actions. It's because of the lifestyle. It's because of the cultural context they're in. They're part of a way of living that is utterly invested in the here and now. Pleasures and treasures, status, experiences, all about the here and now. There's like a blindness to reality in the future. And of course, that is life on this side of the curtain. And so Jesus is dealing with this, and it's not so much a prayer, Psalm 14, it's more of a meditation, of an analysis. And so Jesus notes, as he always does, we've come to realize he always goes to his Father in heaven to make sense of things. So he goes, my Father in heaven. And again, I know we've emphasized it before, but when Jesus tells us to do that all the way through the Sermon on the Mount, and then in our prayers, always begin, our Father in heaven, start from that, get that right in our heads, and then everything else can make sense. Jesus, we see in the Psalms, has in fact done that himself. Always, all his prayers and meditations start from the Father in heaven. So that's how it goes in verse 2. The Lord looks down from heaven on humanity to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. So that's this stunning issue again, that just as Jesus doesn't engage with the intellectual atheism, neither does the Father. What the Father does is, like, obviously they're living and thinking and even feeling that there is no God, because they're in exile and they're driven by this evil behavior. And again, the question he asks really is, are they seeking God? Even if they can't see God. They maybe can't see God, but surely they know the need of him. Aren't they thirsty for life? Why don't they ask to get life from God? Are they not asking, knocking, seeking for God? Even if they feel, I can't see God, I feel exiled from him. This feels like a godless world. I must seek God and call out to God. And so the Father's looking to see if anyone's really doing that. And he's like, no one really does true good. Notice that. No one does good. And that's in verse 3. All have turned aside, together become corrupt. There's no one who does good, not even one. That's Jesus' analysis of the world around him. And that's why when someone says to him, you are good, he's stunned by it. He said, do you realize what you're saying? There is no one good in the world. And you're calling me good? No one is good except God. Do you realize who I really am if you're really saying I'm good? Because there is no one good in the world. And so if somebody really comes to Jesus and says, you're good, they are recognizing him to be this unique, divine, holy one sent from heaven. So good, we might say, he's a good person. And what we usually mean when we say that is, they're okay, I kind of like them. They're funny. They're sort of helpful to me. They do a few things that are helpful to others or things like, it's a very, very minimal understanding of good. Good in the Bible, again, we can't explore it fully, but the book of Titus is fantastic on what is the good. What does good mean? But it's all to do, as we've seen in earlier Psalms, with right speaking and living in this radical way of living with no grip on this present life and sharing all we have. And it's about right worship, worshipping the living God rightly, All of that is taken up in what it is to do, to be good and to do good and to bear fruit that lasts for eternity. But from verse 4, will evildoers never learn? Those who devour my people, says Jesus, as many bread, and they don't call on the Lord. So there's Jesus saying they attack church. Not only do they not call on my Father, but they attack church. That is such a key distinction of the atheists. They are anti-church. And always notice that how the atheist is like that. So Jesus is protective of church, cannot understand why they don't call on the Father. But notice there are two sets of contrasts, one in verse 5, one in verse 6 that Jesus draws. First of all, he notices that the atheists are overwhelmed with anxiety and dread. There's this constant nagging feeling of fear and insecurity in the world around him. Again, remember, it doesn't really matter whether a person owns out loud that they are godless, or only has it deep down inside, or it's only manifest in their actions. The point is, they are godless if they have not taken refuge in Jesus, regardless of what false religions and superstitions and things they hold to. They are without God, because if they haven't taken refuge in Jesus, and therefore have a fear, a dread, a fear of death, ultimately, a terrible insecurity about death, and guilt and shame, and just this feeling of there's like a judgment creeping up to get me, a monster coming to get me. Atheists like that, but by contrast, the church, that they are anti-church and trying to destroy church. But for them, they're not like that, because God is present in the company of the righteous. So that the godless world says, oh, there is no presence of God. Where is God? I don't experience God. But in church, in the company, the family of church people, particularly when they gather together, God is present. And so they are not godless. They experience the presence of God by the Spirit. They experience the Father and the Son. And each individual believer, as they obey Jesus and put his commands into practice, the promise is in John's Gospel that the Father and the Son will actually live within them by the Spirit. So that for the godly have this deep down security and peace. So though they may sometimes feel a somewhat insecurity or anxiety and things, for the godly it is superficial, because they actually experience the presence, church people experience the presence of God. God is not absent for them. And then in verse 6, you evildoers frustrate the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. Again, this way in which, because the godless live for this present age, the pleasures and treasures of this present age, because they live that way, and though they may throw a little bit of money into what they call charity, it isn't in any way changing the world fundamentally. Fundamentally, because they live for here and now and gather to themselves pleasures and treasures, they cause poverty. They cause trouble. They make people, they cause themselves and others to suffer loss all the time. But those that may be poor in this world can find refuge in the Lord, and they have treasure that lasts forever. So the godless try to gain treasure, but it has no future. The poor of this world have gained treasure, the Lord himself and church and so on, that lasts forever. They have a refuge, they have security. The godless are always trying to get security. Like, if I've got enough money, if I've got enough health and fitness and gym membership, if I've got enough of this, then I can feel secure, then I'm okay. The poor maybe have none of those things if they have found refuge in the Lord, they then have a deep down security and peace that nothing can take away from them. So the psalm ends, Psalm 14, with Jesus calling out, "Oh, that salvation for Israel, for church would come out of Zion from heaven." Oh, I can't wait for the time when everything is put right and all that I can see is obvious to everybody. That's kind of how it ends. When the Lord restores the fortune of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. So it's really saying, look, right now, the godless say there is no God. The godly experience the presence of God. I can't wait for that day when what the godly experience is fully manifest. I can't wait for the appearing, the day of God's appearing when all things are put right.